This course is presented to you free of charge by TTJ Tech Services of www.ttjtech.biz and by Stir It Up of www.stiritup.com. And remember, stir is spelled with a U, not an I, so that's STURITUP.com. TTJ Tech Services and Stir It Up are pleased to offer this course to you to the glory of God and to the benefit of all those who listen. Well, praise God and welcome back to Voiceover In and Out, session number 2 today. Great crowd here, praise God. And we are very excited to continue on this same track, which we started on Monday, of learning the basics, the fundamentals. We need to cover one final area of the home screen. If you were with us Monday or you listened online, you know that we covered the various, what I called home screen components or home screen areas. The app area with all the icons and the widgets, and then your dock at the bottom. We covered the status bar at the top, and then we got into the control center. And the only thing I didn't cover, because I didn't want to rush through it and we were running short on time, is I did not cover the notification center. And in order to cover notifications, we have to talk a little bit more. In order to cover notification center, we have to talk a little bit more about notifications in general first, so that you understand what it is that's going on. So, when Apple developed the iPhone initially, we could spend hours in a philosophical debate about whether the executives at Apple had any idea that the iPhone would become what it is today. I would suspect that maybe some of the real visionaries like Steve Jobs may have dreamed of that and imagined it as a theoretical possibility, but I highly doubt, and I certainly could be wrong, but I highly doubt that anyone knew that it would be as life-changing, as revolutionary, as incredible as it has come to be at this day, at this time. And sometimes when those things happen, things have to be rethought a little bit. So, back in 2007, when the iPhone was first introduced, if you got a notification, it simply popped up on the screen and you read the notification and then you dismissed it. But that's when notifications were pretty limited to, just a handful of apps. Somebody sent you a message or somebody called you. Those were probably the two most common notifications, and then maybe email if you had a push email service, which at launch Apple worked with Yahoo on a push email service, I guess. I don't know if they were really partners, but they kind of pushed that, no pun intended. And then eventually you had Mobile Me, which evolved into iCloud and so forth. But, if you didn't have one of those, you didn't even really get email notifications like that unless you opened the mail app. So very few notifications were coming in on day one. But then something happened. The App Store came into existence, and app developers were allowed to have their apps generate notifications also. So now, as time goes by and more apps are coming to the App Store, now not only are we getting phone call and text message and possibly email notifications, now we're also getting our sports scores. Now we're also getting a recipe of the day. Now we're also getting a dictionary word of the day. Now maybe we even have, I don't know, what did they have back in 2008? AOL Instant Messenger or Skype or, some of these other things. And so all of a sudden we're being bombarded with notifications, and they're all popping up and they're interrupting what we're doing. And Apple had to come up with a way to make sure we didn't miss our notifications, but also to make sure they were slightly less intrusive. And that's where we sort of go to what we have today. Now, there's still a lot of things that have been added and changed from iOS version to iOS version. And this is not going to be a session on notifications today. We could spend the entire session doing that, but we're not going to for the sake of time. I will say we will have a Tuesdays with TTJ session in the not too distant future that will talk about notifications in much more depth, that we'll talk about focus modes like do not disturb and sleep mode and custom focus modes. And we'll talk about notification scheduled summaries and even new artificial intelligence summaries through Apple Intelligence that will be released probably later this month. And so we'll be doing that in a Tuesday session, and you won't want to miss that. But for today, suffice it to say that notifications had to change a little bit, and they have. If you are actively using your phone now, in other words, the phone is unlocked, you're in an app somewhere, or you're browsing the home screen, or you're, doing something on your phone, if a notification appears, it is often accompanied by some sort of a sound. And of course, if you've got VoiceOver on, you will actually hear VoiceOver read the notification. And your phone will even give you a little haptic prompt if you have that enabled. There's just a little tap to indicate that there's a notification. Now, at this point, that notification is displayed on the top of the screen as what's called a banner. The vast majority of notification banners disappear in just a few seconds. And there are a few, although you can really set any of them. We'll learn, about our settings. You can set any of them to be persistent, but there are a few apps that already generate persistent banners by default. Persistent means they do not go away. They stay up there until you take action on them. Now, when you have a banner notification, you can access it again by touching it, by simply touching near the top of the screen. If I happen to be demonstrating something else on my phone today and I get a notification, I'll make sure to do that so I can show you what that sounds like. But just know that if you get a notification and you want to act on it or listen to it again, you can touch near the top of the screen. I would typically touch near the top left, just below the status bar, but you really anywhere on the top there, and you can touch that banner again and read what it says. Now, it's also very important to understand what you're going to do next, because notifications are actionable. And that is so important because a lot of people miss out on this. And then two things happen as a result. One, they end up with their notification center absolutely cluttered with notifications from weeks ago even. And secondly, they don't get the benefit of the actions that are available for notifications. So let me give you an example. I've had students say to me, how do I clean up my reminders? Because I still have reminders that alerted me like 2 months ago, but they're still showing up as incomplete. Well, of course, there's ways to do that individually or in bulk. But the point is they should have done it when the reminder came in, and they didn't realize they could. A lot of people are content to just let the notification sit there until the banner disappears, or they will simply choose dismiss. Now, right away, we need to explain the difference between, and some of you are saying, how do you choose dismiss? Well, we'll get to that in just a moment, because some of you are new to this and you don't know yet. We're going to get to that. But for right now, just understand that people do that. And you need to understand what that does when you do it. So if you get a notification banner and the notification banner disappears on its own, you haven't touched it, it just goes away as it's designed to do after, 15, 20 seconds. I never really paid attention to exactly how many. But if it just goes away, you will be able to access it again in the notification center, which we're going to show you in a few moments. And so that happens sometimes. It's not convenient for you to tap on the banner right now and take an action on it. Maybe you're on a phone call. You're doing something really important that you don't want to be, distracted by opening up another app or reading a notification. So you just let it there and it disappears. Those are fine. You can come back to them in the notification center. If, on the other hand, you dismiss a notification, you actually choose the dismiss option, now you cannot find it in Notification Center anymore. Dismiss means I'm done with it. I don't want to see it again. And in theory, you might be able to find it if you open the app that generated it, but not necessarily, because even in that case, if the app thinks you've satisfied its requirement by dismissing the notification, it may not continue to display it. So you don't know. That's a risk you're going to take if you choose the dismiss option. Now, what else can we do with notifications? This is where it gets really cool, because I said they're actionable. Many notifications support context actions that are specifically related to the notification itself. So a moment ago, I gave you the example of reminders. And let's say you get a reminder to take out the garbage. or to water the plants or to pay a bill. When that notification banner pops up, we're still talking about while you're actively using your phone now, remember? You're surfing the web, you're reading email, you're listening to music, watching a movie. That notification banner appears near the top of the screen and you touch it. You bring your finger to it, you touch it once, tap on it, in other words, to bring focus to it. Now, you can now use that long press gesture that we learned about on Monday. That's a double tap and hold, or you can just do a triple tap. And when you do that, it's going to bring up a context menu. You can also find the context menu in the Rotor, which we're going to learn about today in just a little bit. So for those of you who know about the Rotor and how to use it already, you can also get the context menu in the Rotor by choosing more. Those who don't know what the Rotor is, you'll learn very soon. But basically, you can long press a notification and you'll get a context menu. So now, instead of simply dismissing the notification, we have other options too. We have an option to mark that reminder as complete, which is what a lot of people want to be able to do when they've completed the task, right? Say mark as completed. So that's a choice. You also have choices to snooze the reminder, like it'll say, remind me in 1 hour or remind me tomorrow. So these are options that you have. If it's a notification, let's say from Apple News, a breaking news story, if you long press on that, you'll have options to read it. You'll have options to save the story for later. A lot of apps have contextual notification actions that can be taken. And again, the way we access them is to long press them. And of course, the other option is if we really want to, we indeed can dismiss the notification. And we can simply double tap on it without the long press, which will open the app immediately and take us to whatever relevant information there is. So that is how notifications work in a very brief, perhaps a bit oversimplified way, but that's how you access and work with notifications. Now, what if you're not actively using your phone right now? What happens then if your phone is asleep and it's locked? Well, you'll still get the notification if you don't have a focus mode on or something. It's going to wake up your phone and it's going to announce to you that there's a notification from a certain app. And depending on your settings, it may even read the notification, but Face ID devices by default do not. They hide the notification preview until you have authenticated with Face ID. And that's a security feature, a privacy feature. You can enable that feature even on non-Face ID devices if you choose to. Then it will use Touch ID. And if you really want to see the notification previews, even without authenticating, you can disable it as well on those devices. So the choice is yours, but the phone will wake up and then you'll have to unlock it. So now when you have the notifications on the lock screen, they may appear as a stack or a group with multiple notifications from the same app being grouped together or being stacked. You can simply double tap on that group to expand it so that you can read each individual notification. And once you have each individual notification, it's exactly the same as when it's a banner, except you don't have to touch near the top of the screen. You can just swipe left and right through the notifications. And there is going to be the same ability to long press to get the context actions, to dismiss the notification, to use the Rotor if you know what that is. All of these different options are exactly the same. So when you first wake up your phone, there may be an important notification showing, and then you may have a group or a stack or even a button that says show notifications. And so you can just double tap that to see the rest of them. So those are lock screen notifications. Now, if you're using your phone, you missed the notification, but you didn't dismiss it or whatever, or you just want to check and see what's going on, you can also use the notification center. Now, how do we open the notification center? Well, you might remember that there are two ways to do this. We briefly mentioned it on Monday. One way to open the notification center is the old legacy way, where you first touch the status bar and then you swipe down with 3 fingers instead of swiping up with 3 fingers for control center. That's the legacy method of doing it. And Apple says it does indeed work on all devices. But on the newer devices, particularly the devices without a home button, they kind of want us to teach the new method. And I kind of like the new method better, because you don't have to do it in 2 steps. You don't have to touch the status bar first. You just take your finger up to the left corner or the right corner. Remember how we had these slide up and slide down gestures. So we had a gesture to go home where we touch the bottom of the screen. We hear a little, just a little blip sound, and then we swipe up to the second little blip sound. Well, if we touch the top of the screen, you might remember, and we swipe down to the second little blip sound instead of going up. We're going from the top down now. Down to the second little blip sound is control center. But if you keep going even farther, you'll get to a third little blip sound, which brings up the notification center. And how does notification center work? Well, it's very much like the rest of it. The lock screen notifications, they might be in a group. You can ungroup them by double tapping, or I shouldn't say ungroup them, but you can expand the group. And then again, double tap to open the app, long press to get context, use the rotor once we learn how to do that. All these same options are available even in Notification Center. So how you work with a notification once you find it is really no different regardless of where it appears. So again, let's review. We have a touch the top and slide down to the second blip for Control Center. We have a touch the top and slide down to the third blip for Notification Center. Let me just go ahead and show you what that sounds like.
Notes. Photos.
Okay, I'm on the home screen. I'll touch the top. See that little blip? So this time we're going to touch the top and swipe down to the third blip.
Notification Center. Notification Center. Heading.
And I can find a notification by swiping right.
Clear.
There's my clear option, so I can clear all my notifications.
While and do not disturb. Mail. News. Infinity button.
That's expandable.
Activate to expand.
That's a group of notifications that I've appeared since I turned on the do not disturb focus mode to teach this class. And here we have other ones. Okay, here's a group.
News grouped 30 minutes ago. The Hollywood Reporter, The Untold Story.
Okay, so here's a group of Hollywood Reporter news notifications. Not that I really follow. I don't know if I ever chose to follow Hollywood Reporter, but whatever. But I double tap it.
Group. Screen news. Group.
Now it expands it.
Confirm show less. Clear.
I can show less, but here's one.
31 minutes ago. The Hollywood Reporter, The Untold Story.
Okay, so if I want to read that, which I don't really know that I do, but if I wanted to read it, I could double tap to open the app, but I can also long press on it.
Red story button. Save for later button. Dismiss context menu.
And there you go. You have read story, save for later. So we just dismissed the context menu, and I'm going to get out of Notification Center by doing the go home gesture. So once again, top down to the second blip is Control Center. Top down to the third blip is Notification Center. Bottom, touch, and then swipe up to the second blip is the go home. Bring back the home screen gesture. Well, what is touch the bottom and swipe up to the third blip? And the answer is that's the app switcher. Now, I want to say we're not going to spend much time on the app switcher right now because you really don't need to be there. The app switcher is quite often seriously misrepresented. And I have got to just also give you a cautionary tale that there may possibly be a slight change to this in 18.1. Apple's been trying some different things. I can't really talk about them yet. But if we have to reteach this part, we will when 18.1 comes out. But just know that if you touch the bottom and swipe up to the third blip, you get the app switcher. And what the app switcher is it's a place to see all your recently used apps. And if you keep swiping to the left, you'll find apps that maybe weren't even so recently used, but were used a long time ago. And they're just in a suspended state, waiting for you to double tap on them to open them up again. So the only real reason you would want to use the app switcher is if there's an app you recently used, and it's easier to find it that way than going through all of your apps. There is an option to force quit apps that are in the app switcher. But that is really only ever necessary if an app is not functioning as expected. Every once in a while, you'll get an app that'll start glitching, as they say, and it won't be doing what it's supposed to do. And a lot of times just force quitting that app will fix it. But people have taken this way out of context, and they force quit all their apps all the time, thinking that they're saving battery power, improving performance, and neither one is true. I'm not going to get into all of that today because of for the sake of time. Again, we'll have a separate session on that at some point, perhaps on a Tuesday. I'm not going to go into it right now in any more detail than what I've just said, in order to save time. But that really does complete the sort of home screen and related components discussion. Now, the control center, the notification center, and even the app switcher, they can be accessed from within other apps. You don't have to be on the home screen to get to them. But I would just point out that, it's all kind of, in my mind, it's all kind of related to that sort of initial getting started experience. So I wanted to include it here so that you're aware of how to do it, and especially how to work with notifications.
I was just in the notification center while you were doing this, and I had a calendar alert, and I double tapped. Did I double tap? No, I long pressed on that, and it actually made it so that I could join this meeting on that.
Well, I think that's really good to know, and I'm glad you brought it up, because that is a great example of why we should use the long press gesture or try it out.
That has been an enhancement in iOS 18, because as you said, Sarah, you can join the meeting by just long pressing on that, and that option was not there before. It would show you the event, but it would not allow you to join the meeting without having to go to the calendar. So
good thing for folks to know, because if you have this event, for example, or any Zoom meeting for that matter, on your calendar, and you have an alert associated with it, you can, have it alert you 5 or 10 minutes before. And then even if you don't, you can go back to the notification center when it's time and long press on that calendar alert and then choose join. We are going to transition into something completely different now, because it is time for us to begin to talk about the rotor. I'm working on a way to get sound effects. We used to use sound effects, and when I have my Mac, it's easy to do, but the company hasn't released an iPad app, and I'm working on an alternative. I have something in the works. We're going to try one of these days, because I would have just had 2 sound effects already. We'd have a transition sound, and then when I say the rotor, we'd have, dun dun dun, because this is the big thing that sometimes when we get a new user, they're very, very concerned about, and they're kind of nervous about it. But we're going to make it, I think, pretty easy for you. We're going to give you an explanation of it. We're going to demonstrate it, talk about it a little bit, and so let's do it. Okay. The rotor, ROTOR. The rotor is a voiceover control. It is not something that our sighted counterparts will ever deal with unless they're teaching someone or helping someone to use VoiceOver. It's specifically designed for VoiceOver users because there are certain visual gestures and certain visual things that you can do that just really would not properly translate to something that you could do with a screen reader without sight. So Apple had to come up with a way to make these things possible for us. And I think they've done a brilliant job by creating the rotor. So what is the rotor? The rotor is a virtual on-screen control. All right. In its simplest form, if we're looking for a definition or an explanation, that is it. The rotor is a virtual on-screen control. It is dynamic and it's context aware. So what does that mean? It means that the options that are available in this virtual on-screen control, the rotor, will change depending on what you are doing. You may see many, and in fact, you will see many of the same options, but there will also potentially be some special or some different options unique to what you're doing at the time. So if, for example, you are surfing the web and browsing a web page, you may see different options than what you see if you are, let's say, creating a Pages document. It is also important to understand, and this is really important, not only is the rotor going to be dynamic and change depending on maybe what app you're doing or what task you're doing, but it's also even going to change depending on the specific element of the screen that you are on. This is really critical, and I will explain it and make it a little easier to understand as we go here over the next few minutes. But for right now, just remember that point, that you could be in the same app, but maybe there's an on-screen keyboard in the app, maybe there's an edit field, maybe there's buttons and other kinds of controls, and depending on which one of those elements your VoiceOver cursor is on, remember we talked about the VoiceOver cursor on Monday? Depending on which element on the screen that VoiceOver cursor is on, you may see different options in the rotor. And I really don't think that that can be overstated or overstressed, because we have students or, users in general who may be trying to find something in the rotor and they say, well, it's not there. I'm in the same app. I did it yesterday and it was there. But what they don't realize is that maybe in order to see that option, their focus needs to be on the on-screen keyboard instead of just in the edit field, or maybe it needs to be, somewhere else. So you're going to really need to remember that. And as I said, we'll try to demonstrate that as we progress here. So the rotor is a virtual on-screen control. It's going to be dynamic and it's context aware. It also is customizable. So remember, I said there are going to be some things that are static that are always there in the rotor, and those things can be customized in your VoiceOver settings. You can add things to the rotor. You can remove things from the rotor, and you can even reorder. You can change the order in which things appear in the rotor. Now, how do we use the rotor? Well, the first thing to understand is that the rotor is always set to something. It's always set to something. And that's really, really critical also, because this is sometimes confusing. And I'll be honest with you, it actually has been more confusing for people who can see, because what happens is when they perform the gesture to set the rotor, there's a visible like a rotor control dial kind of thing that appears on the screen, and then it goes away after a while. So they think that occasionally that the rotor is not active once the visual representation goes away, but that's not really true. The rotor, again, as I've said before, 100% of the time when you're using VoiceOver, the rotor is always set to something. And you can imagine the rotor as a dial. So think about an old-fashioned radio that has a physical knob to change to tune the radio station. Now you can turn that radio off maybe with a power button, and then it's not going to do anything. But as long as it's on, the radio is always going to be on some station, right? It's not just going to go into nothingness until it's always set to some station. And absolutely, that's the same concept with the VoiceOver rotor. And similarly, the rotor is like a dial, okay? And we actually turn it like a dial. But remember, it's on screen. So the way we turn the rotor, and the purpose of turning the rotor, just like a radio dial, is to change what it's set to. We want to set the rotor to something, and then we'll work within that something after we set it. So the way we turn the rotor is to place two fingers on the screen and rotate them either clockwise or counterclockwise as if we are turning a dial. Now, which way we turn, clockwise or counterclockwise, really doesn't matter. It's up to you. It will cycle around. You're never going to reach an end and not be able to go any further. It's always going to go completely around and come full circle if you keep going. So really, it's just a matter of which one is closer to the option that you want. Again, I'm going to demonstrate this. All right. But I want to talk a little bit more about the gesture first. So again, we said put two fingers on the screen. I tend to use my right index and middle finger. You don't have to, but that's just the way I tend to do it, while I'm holding the phone in my left hand. Now, I've certainly done it other ways, but that's the way when I'm just choosing to do it, and both my hands are free at the moment and so forth. That's how I choose to do it. Now, if I'm trying to do it with one hand, because maybe I'm holding something in the other hand, or, carrying something, that can be done. But the phone has to be able to tell that you are intending to make that sort of rotation movement. And so don't be afraid to even kind of lift your arm a little, as you're rotating, especially till you get used to the gesture. It doesn't have to be that big, and but you've got to get used to it. Now, there are some folks who just continue to have problems with that gesture. And in that case, it is possible, maybe you could use two separate hands, one finger on each hand. And if you bring one finger, if you put two fingers on the screen and you swipe one of them up, while the other hand, you swipe that one finger down, that usually works as well. Okay. So there may be even other ways. And, maybe at the end, Sarah or Cliff will have, another way that I didn't even think of. But again, it's got to be a two finger rotation movement. I know one other thing. Yeah. Praise God. You could turn the phone. If it's not working for you to turn your fingers, you could take the other hand and try to turn the phone and rotate it, to the right or to the left. And that may also work. So when you turn the rotor, you are going through different settings. Again, some of them are always there. Some of them are dynamic, just contextually need to be there. And some of them, maybe you added yourself. Let me just say that there's all kinds of stuff that can be in the rotor. Now, some of the more common ones are, for example, characters, words, and lines. And this gives us the ability to literally read character by character, word by word, or line by line through anything. It doesn't matter if it's a website, if it is a document, or even just a word in an app. Maybe we hear something we don't quite understand, or we say, how do you spell that? So you can go character by character. And how do you do that? Well, I'm going to show you that in a moment. But I'm right now just still building a foundation here. So you can have characters and words and lines in the rotor. There are so many other possible things that can be there. Some of the dynamic stuff that just appears when it is needed, you don't have to add it, are things like the edit rotor, which will allow you to do things like copy and paste, and to perhaps make something bold or italicized or something like that. Those will appear in an edit rotor in some cases. Again, that just appears when it's needed. You don't have to add it. There's a misspelled words rotor option, which used to just appear when you need it. Now, I think I saw in iOS 18 that you can actually choose whether to have it in the rotor or not. I might be wrong, but I thought I remembered seeing that. But misspelled words, that's one that'll show up sometimes. And then you have one you can add to the rotor called text selection that makes it easier for us to select text and so forth. There are custom rotor items that appear in certain apps that only appear in those apps, and developers can implement them themselves. Then you have things like headings, links. These are kind of web specific, but sometimes they're useful in other places too, but especially on web pages, right? Headings, links, form controls, visited links, buttons, and a lot more. There's tons of these kinds of things. And then you can have voiceover settings in the rotor. Some people put like speaking rate and volume and hints and other, audio ducking, different things that they may want to have in their voiceover rotor. So it's all customizable. And I'll show you the setting where we customize it in a little bit. But first, I want to show you how we use it. So again, to change what the rotor is set to, you're going to you're going to rotate two fingers either to the left or to the right on screen until you get to what you want. When you find what you want, most often it's going to be something that is changeable, like reading by character. You need to read character by character then, now that you're set to that. So how do you do that? Well, you swipe down with one finger to read and move to the next character, or you swipe up with one finger to read the previous character. And of course, you can repeat that gesture as many times as you need to, or until you run out of something to read. This is the up and down one finger swipe. Remember on Monday, I said to you that all of our navigation is left to right and right to left. And I said, you might be asking, what about up and down? I said, just be patient. Well, now we know swiping up or down with one finger is going to active. Let me put it this way. It's going to act on whatever rotor setting you have. Okay. It's going to do different things. If your rotor is set to characters, it'll read either next or previous character. If your rotor is set to that edit rotor option that sometimes appears that I talked about a few minutes ago, it's going to go through different edit options: copy, cut, paste, bold, italic. And then in that situation, when you find one you want, you would double tap to actually activate it. And there's occasionally a few other ways that we can work with things in the rotor, but those are the most common. Turn the rotor to pick the setting, and then swipe up or down with one finger to actually use the setting. So let's do some demos here. I'm going to
2:47 p.m.
start out just on the home screen.
Photos.
Now, the home screen is a great example of a context rotor option that only appears when it's needed, and it's called Actions. And my rotor is going to default to Actions every time I land on an app on the home screen, because there are typically 2 actions on the home screen that I can perform without even doing a long press. And that is that I can activate to open the app. That's the default action. Or I can edit, which means I'm going into the edit mode. For those of you who know what that is, it's what Steve Jobs used to lovingly call jiggle mode, which is where all the apps start wiggling on the screen or jiggling, and then you can delete an app, you can rearrange an app, you can create folders. So that edit option in the rotor gives you one way to do that. So there are actions. So if I touch an app right now,
App Store. Double tap to open.
and if I swipe down with one finger,
Edit mode.
there's the edit mode. If I want it, I double tap now to open it, and then up or down,
Activate default.
and that's activate. That's just going to open the app when I double tap on it. And if I want to turn my rotor with 2 fingers away from actions, it'll go to something else. But you notice it defaults to that. Remember, it's always set to something. So if I do a 2-finger rotate to the right,
Characters.
I'm on characters. If I do a 2-finger rotate to the left,
Actions. Activate.
I'm back on actions. And so if I keep turning the rotor to the right now,
Characters. Words. Containers. Headings. Vertical navigation. Toggle live regions and announcements on. Live recognition. Scenes off. Actions. Activate.
and we're back to actions. Now, I know probably some of you have questions about what those other things are. We'll see if time permits to explain. Some of them I will explain as we teach voiceover, but we'll see how much time we have today, and maybe I'll share some of those other ones with you. But my rotor is going to look very different in other apps. But let's go back to characters.
Characters.
Oh, and by the way, just to show you, I can also go counterclockwise.
Actions. Live recognition. Toggle live vertical heading. Contain words.
Right? Or go to the right.
Contain headings. Vertical toggle live rec actions.
See?
Live recognition action characters.
All right, so we're on characters now, and I should still be on App Store. I want to see how to spell that. So I swipe down with one finger repeatedly.
Cap A. Alpha.
Notice it says the letter and the phonetic.
A space cap STORE.
And that's it. I can swipe back up,
EROT cap S.
and it's reading backwards.
Sierra.
I can also set the rotor to words
Words.
and read word by word.
App Store.
Okay. And then again, let's well, no, let's not do that. So that's how the rotor is used right then and there. Very, very simple, very easy. But let's say I go into messages. Now, we have not taught you yet how to use messages. We will probably even as early as next week. We'll start on that. But for now, I'm still going to use messages anyway, because I want to
Messages. Edit button.
All right, let's go into a message that I have with someone here. And I've opened the message. We'll teach you how to do that later. But I just want to show you, if I go to an existing message, and I was asking a family friend, really a cousin, if we are still on for lunch this week, because we're planning on having lunch on Friday. So I sent this message a little bit ago.
Hey, we still on for lunch this Friday. Link 1:51 p.m. Swipe up or down to select a custom action, then double tap to activate.
And you actually hear the hint that there are custom actions. So I must be on the actions rotor setting. We can check if we turn it away and back, right?
Links, actions,
all right.
Activate.
So let's see what the actions are. Swipe down or up.
Tap back. Reply. Add sticker. Copy. Translate. More. Drag. Activate. Default.
So there's lots of actions here. But you'll also notice if I turn the rotor to the left,
links.
We have a links option, which we didn't have. I don't think we had that before. And the reason we have a link option is because there happens to be a linked item in my message. And I think what it is the Friday thing.
For lunch this Friday. Link.
Yeah, see, I swiped down and it read that. And what that's telling me, I could long press that and I could add that to the calendar that way. Maybe it's an actual web link and I could visit the website by double tapping it. But in this case, it's a calendar event. Now, similarly, if I go into the edit field,
message, iMessage, insertion point at end,
by double tapping, and let's just say I type another couple of sentences or even a couple of words.
Cap, W, there.
And now I just typed hi there.
Message, text field is editing. Hi there.
Don't worry, we'll teach you how to do all of that later, but that's not the point. Right now, the point is that you're going to see that because I'm in an edit field, I have additional options in my rotor now. If I two-finger rotate, I did not have before some of these options.
Text effects, mentions, misspelled words. Swipe left or right to choose a replacement, then double tap to insert.
And believe me, we will learn how to use that later. But misspelled words, text effects.
Edit.
There's that edit rotor. No text is selected right now.
Select.
I can
select all. Right.
Look at all these choices.
Undo. Scan text. Select.
Okay. And once I select the text, there would even be more text selected. I'll just do a select all.
Select all.
I'll double tap.
Hi there. Selected.
And now I'll delete it with my delete on screen.
Delete selection deleted.
Okay. So I didn't have to actually delete character by character. I just selected it all and I deleted. Now up in the upper left corner, there does happen to be, as we would expect,
one unread back button. One unread.
We'll double tap that, a back button. So that's another example of how the rotor changes. And there's so much more, right? There's so much more. But right now we're just getting a feel for, again, fundamentals here, how to use this rotor. Now, there's a place where we can see all of the available rotor options, except we're not going to see the context ones that just appear when they're needed. And we're not going to see the ones that are unique to each app. Let me give you an example of one that is unique to an app, by the way. There is a TV service called Philo, Philo. They're a streaming TV service. They have an app for Apple TV and iPad, iPhone, and a lot of other devices too. And in that streaming service, you can get about 90 channels for about $28 a month. A lot of the popular channels and, DVR on demand, all these things. Well, their app has a rotor option specifically to go from channel to channel. And so when you open the guide in the Philo app, instead of having to try to figure out, well, this is this channel, but then if I swipe to the right, it's a later time of day and a later time. This particular app, you can set the rotor to channels and it quickly, you swipe up or down with one finger to go from the next to the previous channel. And then you can swipe to the right to see what's on that channel at different times throughout the day. It was a very, I thought, clever and quite honestly, probably the best. I am a huge Xfinity fan and I like the Xfinity Stream app. Praise God, they do an excellent job. We're very blessed to have a really good package with them and everything. And it's very accessible with VoiceOver. But I got to give credit where credit's due. And I've got to say that rotor implementation of the guide with Philo is probably about the best I've seen of any app that has a live channel guide, because they realize that in order for Voiceover users to really benefit from this, they need to make it easier to distinguish between moving from channel to channel and then moving from hour to hour within the guide. That's a tricky concept if you're a Voiceover user, right? And so that implementation of channels in the Rotor, I think absolutely brilliant. And so, there are some really cool things like that. You're not going to find channels in your Rotor settings under Voiceover settings. They just appear when you open the Philo app because the developer has implemented that. So there are some things that we won't see when we go to settings, but there's quite a few that we will. And I'd like to just show you where that is and a couple of other related settings. So allow me to go home from my Messages app.
Photos, search, settings,
Open settings.
settings,
And I'm going to open accessibility.
channel accessibility, button, accessibility, heading,
Now I'm going to swipe over to Voiceover.
voiceover, on, voiceover, switch button, on,
And now I'm going to touch lower on the screen to find Rotor. And then I might need to swipe a couple, but I know it's a bit further down.
braille, voiceover, bus, audio, command, rotor, button,
And I'm going to double tap to show you these settings.
rotor items, button,
All right. So
rotor, heading, voiceover,
there's our
button,
back button in the upper left. And then
heading,
there's the heading with the title. You're already beginning to see predictable patterns. You just may not know it yet, but you are. We'll talk more about them as we progress through the course. Now let's go to the right with one finger swipe.
rotor items, button,
The first option that we have there is Rotor items. And that is the one that allows you to customize your rotor. So we'll take a look at that in just a moment. But I want to first show you what else is in here.
change rotor with item, switch button, on, double tap to toggle setting,
Let's see if there's a description of that.
changes the selected rotor based on the voiceover focused item.
Exactly. Okay. So do you remember that I said to you that the rotor options will change depending on where you are, even a specific element on the screen? Well, in addition to the rotor items that are available changing, so too will the selected rotor setting. And the easiest way for me to illustrate that is that, do you remember when I said anytime you touch an app or you swipe to an app on the home screen, the rotor is going to default back to actions? So even if you were reading character by character or word by word, if you move to another app, your rotor is going to go back to actions. Whenever there's an action available, the rotor will always default to that. And likewise, if you land on a scrubber or some kind of adjustable value like a volume slider or a media scrubber or maybe a picker on a website where you have to choose your state, those kinds of things, you may not have realized you were actually using the rotor when you swiped up and down. It'll say swipe up or down to change the value, or like in a volume control, you swipe up to increase the volume, you swipe down to decrease the volume. That's actually a contextual rotor option called adjust value. If you were to turn your rotor to the left or to the right, you'd get out of that. You'd go to like characters or something, and then you wouldn't be able to control the volume. But if you turn your rotor back, then you would hear it say adjust value. And once again, you could adjust the value by swiping up or down with one finger. So that's actually a rotor item. But the important thing to understand is that anytime you land on a value adjuster, the rotor automatically defaults to adjust value. So you don't have to find that. That is something that I prefer, but maybe some people don't. Maybe they don't want their rotor to always default to that. So that's where this option comes into play that we just heard.
Taps on homes, changes the select change rotor with item, switch button, on.
Change rotor with item. If you turn that off, then those extra context items are absolutely still going to appear in the rotor when they're needed. But the difference is your rotor isn't going to automatically be set to them. So where the rotor defaults to actions every time you touch an app, that won't happen if you turn off that setting. It'll stay on characters or words or whatever you had. So personal preference, I definitely want to leave that setting on. I like knowing that when I land on a value adjuster, I can just swipe up or down to adjust the value. I don't have to turn the rotor first. But again, that's up to you. So that's where that setting is. We also have an option here.
Changes the edit apps on home screen. Switch button on.
And
direct touch.
that just allows us to quickly have that edit mode option and so forth. And, again, you can do that with a long press instead. But so that's an option. And you have a couple of things here.
Touch apps button.
Direct touch apps. We're not going to get into that today. That's a bit more advanced in my opinion. Let's go back to Rotor items.
Change rotor items button.
This is where we double tap on this.
Selected characters.
Now,
actions available.
This is where we can customize what's in the rotor. If something is selected, that means it's already going to appear in the rotor. If it is not selected, it is not going to appear in the rotor. If you wish to change its state, either select something that's deselected or to deselect something that's already selected, you simply double tap and that toggles it from unselected to selected or vice versa. You also heard that there are actions available on these items. That's one way, and probably the simplest way, to move your rotor items. You can also do it by a drag, like a double tap, hold and drag. But that, again, I feel is not something that we should learn on only the second day of the course. I think that needs to be reserved for a bit later when you're more comfortable with this. But you can actually do it with the rotor. Listen to these options. Remember, I'm going to default to actions because that's how it's set. So if I swipe up or down.
Move down. Activate. Move down.
All right, you can't move up because I'm on the first one. But if I choose like words.
Selected words.
Now.
Move up. Move down. Activate.
So you could double tap on move up or move down to change the position in the rotor where these things occur. So your first option.
Reorder character. Selected characters.
And then you have.
Reorder characters.
That's the dragger. That's the handle.
Double tap and hold. Wait for the sound, then drag to rearrange.
That's the other way to. That's the other way to move things in the rotor is to use the reorder handle that I said that's a bit more advanced, so we'll come back to that. But I'm not going to go through everything here because, again, for the sake of time, there's so much in here. I would encourage you to take a look at it. Maybe you'll find something you really wanted in the rotor or want in the rotor that you didn't even know existed. Or maybe, too, you'll find that there are things that you don't want. I like to keep my rotor pretty slim. I definitely don't put voiceover settings in my rotor. Now, I don't criticize anybody who does. That's your choice. It's personal preference. No right or wrong. But I don't want it because I very rarely, if ever, change my voiceover settings. I've got the voice the way I like it. I've got everything set the way I want it. If I really wanted a different voice, I would probably create an activity for those times when I want it. For those of you who know what an activity is, again, our new users, I apologize. You'll learn that later. You might not know it right now, but this way we keep our veteran users from falling asleep here if we give them a little tip every now and then, right? I'm kidding, of course, but that is the way I would do it. If I really wanted a different voice, let's say when for reading a book or something, I would just create an activity for the Books app. I wouldn't put it in the rotor. Now I did put one of the new iOS 18, actually two of the new iOS 18 things in the rotor, live recognition and toggle the live region announcements. Now that I've got them in the rotor, I'm thinking I probably don't really need them in there because I would always want the announcements on and the live recognition. There's another way to do that. So I may or may not take them out of there. The reason I like to keep my rotor slim is because the more stuff you have in your rotor, the more times you have to rotate to go from what you want or where you are to what you want possibly. So I keep it small. There's so much here. As I said, I'm not going to go through everything, but I've got characters, I've got words, I've got lines, I've got text selection so that I can easily select text. I don't have any of these voiceover things. I do have the typing mode, although I typically stay on direct touch typing. Again, we're going to learn typing soon. I've got headings in my rotor. Oh my, as I said, I could easily just keep reading and then we'd end up going through all of them, even though I said I wasn't going to. So I'm not going to do that, but you could, and I would encourage you to take a look at them. And there's handwriting options. If you are a user of handwriting with VoiceOver, there's Braille options. If you use, Braille screen input, although now there's a new way in iOS 18 to toggle that. But all of these things are available to you. And again, you can just double tap something if it's not already in the rotor, and you can add it that easily. So I wanted to show you that as well. Now, while we are in settings, I want to find two other settings that are kind of new. They're not in Rotor. They're just back in the regular part here. And I want to say that one is under Braille, because I want to make sure that you're aware of our new setting that Apple has introduced, a new feature. And where do I see it? I think it's here under Braille screen input. Let's see. Yes. Okay, here it is. So if you go to settings, accessibility, voiceover, and Braille. And again, this is kind of one of these little gems for our longtime users, probably more so than the brand new users. But I want you to hear when you go under Braille, then there's an option if you swipe to the right several times called Braille screen input. If you double tap that button, one of the choices as you swipe now to the right is this.
Use activation gestures, switched button, off. Double tap to toggle setting.
And I've got mine off, but it is on by default, I believe. I've actually reassigned that gesture to something else. What it is, if you, it says without using the gestures, you can still start Braille screen input using the rotor. When using the rotor to exit Braille screen input. Okay, so it's giving me this. If you don't have the activation gestures on, you can still do it the old way, in other words, and you just have to make sure BSI is in the rotor. But what are the activation gestures? And the answer is it's a 2-finger double tap, but it's in a very specific place. It has to be at the edges. So you're going to put one finger at the bottom and one finger at the very top edge of the display. And if I do this, let me put on my keyboard help.
Starting help. To stop help, perform a 4-finger double tap or 2-finger scrub or press escape on the keyboard.
Now, if I do that at the bottom and top edges here,
2-finger double tap the far edges. Type to
see, and it tells me that it acknowledges that that's a real gesture. 2-finger double tap the far edges. So if you've got that setting enabled, then you can enable Braille screen input that way. And if you did not know about that, and you have sometimes maybe inadvertently activated it, now you know why. Now, again, you can still use the old method. And then when using the rotor, you can exit Braille screen input by moving both fingers, and you can do a 2-finger scrub and all of those kinds of things. That's still, available. So that's a new setting and a new gesture that I wanted to introduce our existing users to, and even the new ones maybe. And I think that I think I'll wait on the other one because we'll cover that in a later time. So that's the one new gesture that I wanted to make sure that I introduced you to. Now, again, when we are using the rotor, it is very important to remember these little tidbits about the rotor that I mentioned to you today. And this is not going to be our last conversation about the rotor, because the rotor is everywhere as long as we are a voiceover user. Trainer Cliff likes to say the rotor is your friend, and that's true, because you always want to check, just like the long press gesture, you always want to check what's in the rotor, and it may be very helpful to you because there may be things in there that you didn't even realize. Just remember, not everything that you have in the rotor is available in those settings, because some of them are especially created for certain apps. And you don't have to enable them. They just appear when they're needed. But I also want you to remember the fact that what you're focused on the screen will determine what you see in the rotor. It's not always going to be the same, even though you're in the same app. So if you are expecting to see something and you don't see it, try to put the voiceover cursor on something else by touching somewhere else. If I'm trying to edit text in an edit field, I really have to make sure that the voiceover cursor is in that edit field. And if it isn't, I won't have the same options. So the voiceover cursor, the focus of that cursor, which of course all you got to do is touch somewhere, right, to bring focus to it, or you can swipe, But that is so critical to determining what we actually can see and do in the rotor. And then remember, once again, that once you set the rotor with your 2-finger rotation, then you swipe up or down with 1 finger to change the value of the setting, or to work within that setting, or to read character by character, or whatever you're doing. And certain ones, if they are actual actions like copy, paste, activate, they're going to then require a double tap once you swipe up or down and find what you want in the rotor. Then you're going to actually have to double tap. And then there's ones that we're not going to teach today, but we will when we get into more advanced stuff like advanced editing, text editing. So we'll learn about how to select text with the rotor. We'll learn about how to find and correct spelling errors. We'll get to all of this, right? Today, it's just a foundational discussion of the rotor and how to use it. But what I would encourage you to do now is, we're going to go to Cliff and Sarah, get their comments, and then we're going to go to your questions. But beyond that, what I would really encourage is for you to try this in different apps, play with the rotor, and see what you can find. Because honestly, you might be surprised at the various things that are in there. And now when we say, well, this can be done using the rotor, you know exactly what that means, and you know how to do it. So remember, I said to you before that if you have a notification, you can long press it, but you can also use the rotor and choose more. Well, that's how you do it. The rotor, when you touch a notification, the rotor will default to actions. You can swipe up or down to hear more. You can choose dismiss, swipe up to dismiss and double tap. It'll actually dismiss the notification. And there's usually even a third one called options. And that options is specific to like the app, like, okay, do I want to deliver these notifications quietly instead of always being notified every time? Do I want it to not interrupt me, but just go to the notification center? Or, do I want to do a scheduled summary or those kinds of things? So again, the rotor is useful in notifications. And you're going to see more and more as we use different apps, how useful it is in those apps as well.
You were talking about buttons and different things that you can put on your rotor. My question is, so like there are apps that are specific that do have buttons and things, and it would be so much easier to just find those. Is that all specific to how that works with the way the developer creates the app? Because I don't see it on my rotor in those particular apps. There's no way to get around that and make it display just buttons only and things like that. That's controlled by the developer. Is that correct?
So let me make sure that I understand what you're saying. Like, you have gone into your rotor settings and you have added, for example, buttons. But then what you're saying is that when you try to turn the rotor in a particular app that you expect to have that, you don't see buttons as an option when you 2-finger rotate. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And yes, you're exactly right that is entirely dependent upon the developer. A lot of I shouldn't say a lot. I mean, there's millions of apps on the App Store. I don't know if it's a lot. But you run into occasionally developers that seem as though they're trying to kind of reinvent the wheel, and they're not using standard controls. Apple gives developers the sort of frameworks that they need to make things accessible. And so if you call something a button and you code it properly to be a button, then Voiceover will recognize it as a button, and your button's rotor should work. If you have something non-standard, is typically when you're going to run into those situations where Voiceover doesn't see it as that, and then consequently it's not in the rotor.
In the rotor, when you're using messages, when you send a text message in the rotor, there used to be a place where you could send reactions. I don't see that now with the latest update. What's up with that?
Well, what's up is they just changed the name of it. So they actually changed the name to bring it in line with what Apple called it all along. But they're sort of interchangeable. If you are on a message that you received and you swipe up or down, you're going to hear something called tap back. And
I see that. Yeah.
That is the reactions. And if you double tap it, it's got the same things you have been used to, plus a whole bunch of new things now.
Cool.
Yep. You can even choose like you can search for an emoji and send any emoji that you want as a tap back or a reaction now too. Take a look at our YouTube, our podcast. Make sure you visit our website and subscribe to that newsletter as well. We mentioned, I think, that there's a subscribe button there, and we're going to communicate with you in that way if we have anything to share in between, like if we are going to be having something special on a Tuesday that we think you all ought to, come in and listen to. Everybody, God bless you, and have a great week and great weekend also. And thanks so much to trainers Sarah and Cliff for all your help as always. And we will see you next time.
Thanks for joining today's session. Didn't get your question answered? Have an additional comment or feedback? Email us info@ttjtech.biz or info@stiritup.com. And remember, stir is spelled with a U. That's STURITUP.com. Or check out our websites for additional resources. That's ttjtech.biz or stiritup.com. And remember, subscribe to the newsletter when you're there. That way, you don't miss out on any upcoming announcements or events. Thanks for joining us. God bless, and see you next time.